The sharp sting of flesh meeting flesh echoed through the sterile conference room, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. My cheek burned where his hand had connected. But it wasn't the physical pain that hit me hardest, it was the silence. The deafening silence from everyone else in the room. 12 pairs of eyes stared blankly at their notebooks, their laptops, the floor, anywhere but me. No one gasped, no one flinched. Not even a murmur of disapproval broke the suffocating quiet. I stood there, trembling, not out of fear, though I should have been afraid, but out of disbelief. This wasn't how things were supposed to go today. I had walked into this meeting expecting nothing more than another routine presentation on quarterly projections, armed with spreadsheets and graphs, ready to prove my worth yet again. Instead, I found myself standing like prey before a predator, cornered by a man whose temper had finally slipped its leash. My name is Claire Harper, and until 15 minutes ago, I thought I understood what power dynamics meant in the corporate world. I'd spent years climbing the ladder at Crestwood and Associates, sacrificing nights, weekends, pieces of myself, all to earn a seat at the table. And now here I was, reeling from the blow dealt by my own boss, Gregory Langston, the same man who once praised me during company-wide meetings, who shook my hand after promotions, who smiled while handing over awards like they could fill the void he left behind with every microaggression and passive-aggressive comment. Gregory didn't say anything after the slap. He just sneered, his lips curling into something cruel, as if daring me to react, daring me to fight back. But I didn't. Not then. Because deep down, beneath the shock and humiliation, something inside me clicked. A switch flipped, igniting a fire I hadn't known existed. It wasn't rage exactly, though that came later. It was clarity. In that split second, I realized two things. First, that Gregory saw me as disposable, replaceable. Second, that everyone else in the room saw me the same way. They stayed silent because speaking up would mean risking themselves. They looked away because looking meant acknowledging complicity. They let it happen because, in this twisted hierarchy, survival trumped morality every single time. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. Without saying a word, I grabbed my folder off the conference table, turned on my heel, and walked out. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the knowledge that I couldn't unsee or undo what had just happened. As I reached the elevator, I pressed the button harder than necessary, willing the doors to open faster. When they finally did, I stepped inside and leaned against the cool metal wall, letting the numbness wash over me. The ride down to the lobby felt endless. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored surface, pale and wide-eyed, a stranger wearing my face. What struck me most wasn't the red mark blooming across my cheek, it was the look in my eyes. There was no fear there, only resolve. Resolve to make them regret everything. 15 minutes later, I returned. But I wasn't alone. Crestwood and Associates wasn't always a toxic cesspool disguised as a Fortune 500 company. At least, that's what I told myself when I joined right out of college, fresh-faced and eager to prove myself. Back then, it still carried remnants of its founder's vision, a place where hard work and innovation mattered more than politics and posturing. That idealism didn't last long. By the time Gregory took over as CEO 5 years ago, the rot had already set in. His leadership style was less about inspiring greatness and more about instilling fear. Employees became pawns in his grand game of control, moved around the board until they either broke under pressure or conformed completely. I used to think I was different, stronger, smarter. I convinced myself that I could navigate these murky waters without losing sight of who I was. After all, I'd earned my spot here. I worked late nights, drafting proposals, skipped lunches to perfect presentations, and volunteered for projects others shied away from. I believed in earning respect through effort, not manipulation. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. Respect doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has to be reciprocated. And Gregory? He didn't respect anyone unless they served his agenda. Still, I tried. For years, I tolerated his veiled insults disguised as constructive criticism. I nodded politely when he dismissed my ideas, only to present them as his own days later. I swallowed my pride when he publicly undermined me in front of clients, brushing it off as part of the learning process. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd gain enough leverage to move somewhere better, somewhere healthier, somewhere where people wouldn't sit idly by while someone slapped you across the face. That illusion shattered today. What hurt the most wasn't Gregory's violence. It was the collective apathy of everyone else. These were people I'd shared coffee breaks with, collaborated on projects with, celebrated small victories with. People who knew me, who claimed to value teamwork and camaraderie. Yet none of them said a word. Not Rachel from HR, who prided herself on fostering a safe workplace environment. Not Daniel, my closest colleague, who often joked about Gregory's antics but never dared challenge him. Not even Marcus, the senior VP, who sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as Gregory raised his hand to strike. Their silence spoke louder than any words ever could. It told me that I was expendable. That loyalty here was conditional, reserved only for those willing to play Gregory's game. It told me that justice wasn't a priority unless it aligned with profit margins. And it told me that if I wanted change, I'd have to create it myself. So I left the building, not to run away, but to prepare, to gather reinforcements, to turn the tables in a way that would leave Gregory and everyone else speechless. Because revenge isn't just about retaliation, it's about reclaiming power. And I plan to take mine back piece by piece. When I returned 15 minutes later, the atmosphere in the office shifted instantly. Heads turned, whispers spread, and nervous glances darted between cubicles. Some employees recognized the figure walking beside me immediately, while others needed a moment to process what they were seeing. A few stopped typing mid-sentence, their fingers hovering awkwardly above their keyboards. The air buzzed with tension, anticipation, and a hint of dread. Gregory emerged from his corner office, his usual swagger faltering slightly as he caught sight of us. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could utter a single syllable. "Everyone," I announced loudly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "meet Evelyn Carter." Evelyn stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without effort. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a sleek ponytail, she exuded authority. Her reputation preceded her. Former head of legal compliance at one of the largest multinational corporations in the country, renowned whistleblower advocate, and perhaps most importantly, Gregory's worst nightmare. "This is Evelyn," I continued, addressing the room. "She's here to conduct an independent investigation into workplace misconduct at Crestwood and Associates. Starting today." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Gregory seemed momentarily stunned, though he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Claire," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "this is hardly necessary. Whatever issue you're having can surely be resolved internally." "Oh, I don't think so," Evelyn interjected smoothly, stepping closer to him. She extended her hand, which he hesitated to shake. "Mr. Langston, I believe we'll find plenty to discuss. Let's start with your management style." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Employees exchanged uneasy looks, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others glanced at me, curiosity mingling with admiration or maybe fear. Either way, the tide was turning. For the first time, Gregory wasn't the one holding all the cards. "Now," Evelyn continued, pulling a tablet from her briefcase, "let's get started. Claire, why don't you begin by sharing your experience?" As I recounted the events of the morning, the humiliation, the slap, the silence, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Words flowed freely, unburdened by shame or doubt. With each sentence, I reclaimed a fragment of my dignity. Around me, colleagues began nodding subtly, their expressions softening. A few even whispered apologies under their breath, though whether out of guilt or solidarity I couldn't tell. Gregory listened silently, his earlier bravado crumbling with every detail I revealed. When I finished, Evelyn turned to the rest of the room. "Does anyone else have experiences they'd like to share?" she asked, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. At first, no one spoke. Then, slowly, tentatively, hands began to rise. One by one, employees stepped forward, recounting instances of harassment, intimidation, and discrimination, all swept under the rug in the name of maintaining Crestwood's pristine image. Each story added fuel to the fire, bolstering the case against Gregory and exposing the systemic rot that had festered unchecked for years. By the end of the day, Evelyn had gathered enough evidence to warrant formal action. She assured everyone that confidentiality would be maintained and encouraged further disclosures. As she wrapped up her initial assessment, she addressed the room one final time. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said firmly, "but it starts with accountability. Today, you've taken the first step toward creating a safer, fairer workplace. Don't stop now." With that, she exited the office, leaving behind a mix of hope and unease. For the first time in years, the balance of power at Crestwood felt uncertain, and that uncertainty terrified Gregory. For me, however, it marked the beginning of something new, something powerful. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't face it alone. The days that followed Evelyn's arrival were unlike anything Crestwood and Associates had ever experienced. The air buzzed with whispered conversations, nervous glances, and an undercurrent of both fear and hope. Employees who had once tiptoed around Gregory now walked with a cautious confidence, buoyed by the knowledge that someone was finally listening. Anonymous tip lines lit up with reports of misconduct spanning years, some minor infractions, others outright criminal. It became clear that Gregory's reign of terror wasn't just about one bad boss. It was systemic, entrenched in every corner of the company. Gregory, for his part, tried to fight back. He called emergency meetings with senior leadership, attempting to rally their support against what he framed as a witch hunt. But even Marcus, the same man who'd sat silently during my ordeal, refused to back him fully. Instead, Marcus quietly distanced himself, citing ethical concerns, while privately advising me to stay vigilant. It was a small gesture, but it signaled a seismic shift. The cracks in Gregory's empire were widening, and no amount of bluster could hold them together. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked tirelessly, conducting interviews, reviewing documents, and piecing together a damning portrait of Gregory's leadership. She uncovered emails detailing discriminatory hiring practices, financial records hinting at embezzlement, and testimonies from former employees who had been silenced or forced out. Every discovery strengthened our case, turning what started as a personal vendetta into something far greater, a movement for accountability. But the turning point came when Rachel from HR broke her silence. For years, she had played the role of Gregory's enabler, brushing off complaints and protecting the company's image at all costs. Yet there she was, sitting across from Evelyn one afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she confessed everything. She revealed how Gregory had pressured her to falsify performance reviews, intimidate whistleblowers, and bury allegations of sexual harassment. Her testimony was explosive, not because it was surprising, many of us suspected as much, but because it came from someone so deeply complicit in his schemes. When Evelyn presented her findings to the board of directors, the room fell silent. Even Gregory, who had stormed into the meeting ready to defend himself, seemed shaken. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. One by one, board members turned on him, their loyalty eroded by the sheer scale of his misdeeds. By the end of the session, Gregory was stripped of his title, his equity stakes frozen pending further investigation. He left the building flanked by security, his head bowed, clutching a cardboard box filled with the remnants of his desk. In the weeks that followed, Crestwood underwent a transformation. A new interim CEO was appointed, an outsider brought in to rebuild trust and implement sweeping reforms. Policies were rewritten, transparency became a priority, and employees were encouraged to speak up without fear of retaliation. Evelyn stayed on temporarily as an advisor, ensuring that the changes stuck and holding people accountable when they faltered. As for me, I found myself thrust into a position of unexpected influence. My courage in confronting Gregory inspired others to step forward, and soon I became a de facto leader among my peers. Together, we formed a committee dedicated to fostering a healthier workplace culture, one built on respect, collaboration, and integrity. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard and skepticism lingered. But slowly, steadily, we began to see progress. One evening, months after the storm had passed, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of the office building, watching the city lights twinkle below. Evelyn joined me, leaning against the railing with a satisfied smile. "You've come a long way," she said, sipping her coffee. "Proud of you." I nodded, reflecting on everything that had happened. "It feels strange," I admitted, "like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop." It might, she replied honestly. Change is messy, and there will always be setbacks. But what you've done here, that's permanent. You've given people a voice, Claire. Don't underestimate the power of that. Her words stayed with me long after she left. They reminded me why I had fought, not just for revenge, but for justice, for dignity, for the countless others who deserved better than what they'd been given. Years later, when I think back to that day in the conference room, I feel neither anger nor regret. Instead, I feel pride, not because I sought vengeance, but because I chose to rise above. Crestwood is a different place now, a beacon of progress in an industry often resistant to change. And though challenges remain, I know we're stronger for having faced them head-on. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what became of Gregory. Rumor has it he tried to start over somewhere else, only to find doors closing in his face wherever he went. Karma, some might say. But for me, his downfall isn't the victory, it's the lesson. Power unchecked corrupts, but courage united can dismantle even the strongest walls. And so, as I sit in my office overlooking the city I helped reshape, I remind myself of the truth I learned that fateful day. Silence may protect you, but action sets you free. Claire's bravery sparked a revolution at Crestwood and Associates. Gregory was removed from power, and the company underwent transformative changes, prioritizing accountability, transparency, and employee well-being. Claire emerged as a leader, inspiring her colleagues to build a healthier workplace culture. With Evelyn's guidance, justice prevailed and Crestwood became a model for positive change in the industry. In the end, Claire found peace, purpose, and pride in knowing she had made a lasting difference for herself and everyone else who deserved better.